Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled Connected Workers Are Empowered Workers. My name is Greg Herzl. I'm a marketing manager here at CAI Software. We're pleased to offer this webinar to you guys today in partnership with Forrester and one of our key product brands, Parsable, a CAI software solution. We have a lot of valuable information to talk about and go through today. We're really excited to share this with you, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we'll not be answering questions live during this webinar. However, we still do welcome your questions. So at any point, feel free to drop a question into the chat. You can also email us, and our contact information will be up on the screen at the end of the call with any follow-up questions, and we'll take those offline. Today's webinar is co-presented by Paul Miller with Forrester and Matt Belkin with Parsable. Paul Miller is the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. Paul focuses on smart manufacturing and the future of mobility with research that explores how new and emerging technologies challenge established organizations and their business models. Relevant themes include the growing importance of digital twins through the life of industrial assets, the role of IoT in connecting physical with digital workflows, the introduction of increasingly automated equipment into human workflows, and plenty more. Paul has joined Forrester in 2015, having spent the previous 6 years as an independent analyst and the founder of the Cloud of Data. Matt Belkin is the CEO of Parsable, one of our CAI software solutions. He is a proven tech entrepreneur, and Matt has scaled multiple businesses to billion-dollar valuations, and for the past 3 years has been leading the Parsable product line in offering a powerful connected worker platform to allow global companies in a wide array of industries to digitize their frontline operations. And with that, Paul, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, everyone, both those of you watching live and those of you watching the recording after this session. Thank you all for giving us some of your time. As Greg said, my name is Paul Miller. I'm an analyst at Forrester Research covering the smart manufacturing space. And I'm just trying to, Matt, can you pass me control again? It doesn't seem to be working. Apologies for this, everyone. 1 second. Oh, there we go. There we go. So, connected workers are empowered workers. You've heard Greg say this, and I want to dig into some of Forrester's data and some of Forrester's research, looking at the role of connected workers, looking at the role of data, IoT, digital twins, in giving those workers the information they need to allow them to play a fully effective, fully involved, fully engaged role in the manufacturing world in which they find themselves. And I'm sure you've all heard this term Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. And we've been talking about this for about a decade. And it leads on from a number of other industrial revolutions that have gone on over the last 300 years or so. The first industrial revolution, James Watt and his steam engine, mechanization, industrialization, the importance of steam power. We began to see some automated machines, those big steam-powered looms, for example, in Manchester, not very far away from me here. Autonomous machines that could do things themselves, almost non-existent. Workers' rights, almost non-existent. Worker autonomy, pretty high actually. Individual artisans, individual specialists in their own craft, doing their own thing to their own time with control over what they did. So long as they got paid, they could pretty much do the job any way they wanted. Fast forward to the beginning of the 20th century, and we see this notion of Industry 2.0. We see mass production. We see assembly lines, we see electrification, and people like Henry Ford, big in this space, bringing mass production and standardization to the production of cars. In his case, remember, any color you want, so long as it's black. That's pretty standardized. This was happening, as I said, early in the 20th century. We're seeing more automated machines coming in, more looms, but also metal presses and other things, doing more of the work, requiring individual humans to use less muscle, and having the machines take on more of that work. Um, Still no autonomous machines, no machines that can do things for themselves. Workers' rights beginning to emerge. We're starting to see the rise of unions. We're starting to see the rise of organized labor. We're starting to see the rise of, fixed work weeks and all these things as governments recognize that they need to step in and offer some protections here. Worker autonomy starting to drop off a bit. It's getting a bit more, Matt, turn up on a Monday morning, you'll do the thing that I, your boss, tell you to do. And whether you like it or not, you're banging rivets today. Get on with it, and stop moaning. So, workers' autonomy beginning to fall off a bit. Industry 3.0 coming in the 60s, and then continuing through to sort of the early 21st century. More automation, the first industrial robots beginning to appear, the first computers beginning to appear, electronics driving things like programmable logic controllers down on the plant floor. Some more automated machines, those robots banging metal, welding, moving material around on the shop floor. Still no autonomous machines, lots of workers' rights. Particularly in established markets, say like Europe, the States to a degree as well. Lots of protections for looking after workers in those roles. Worker autonomy hasn't really changed much. It's still pretty much as it was under Industry 2.0. Fast forward to Industry 4.0, and that all this talk of digitization, IoT, machine learning, and now, of course, AI. Everybody talks about AI, and I will some more in a moment. More automated machines, more use of robots, more use of autonomous mobile robots, automated guided vehicles, and all the rest of it. And the very first glimmer of some autonomous machines, machines that can decide for themselves how to complete a task. Very, very early, very, very experimental in most cases, but starting to emerge. Workers' rights still pretty much there and still, looking pretty good. But worker autonomy, and this is the important point. This is why we're going to talk about connected workers for the rest of this presentation. Worker autonomy falling away. There's a real problem here, a real worrying trend. You're seeing far too many plant managers, design a system, design a process, design a workflow for the machine, and just having people slot themselves into the gap. The machine will bang this metal. You need to be ready at the end to carry the finished product away, human being. Much, much less autonomy, much less ability to make their own decisions about how work gets done. And that's worrying for a whole load of reasons. And as we look at connected worker solutions, which is where I'm about to go, as we look at connected worker solutions, there are some that reinforce this, that basically say, here are the 10 steps you have to follow. No questions asked, no flexibility, no adaptability, just follow the 10 steps. You are a robot with a heartbeat. Just get the job done. That is not great. There are other connected worker solutions, and we're going to hear a lot more about that in a moment, which are trying to bring some of that autonomy back. They're trying to give workers agency. They're trying to give workers the information they need to make informed decisions. They're trying to give different instructions to different workers. The trainee turning up for the first day, they maybe need 20 steps for a task and some videos and some helpful prompts. The expert who's been doing the job for 40 or 50 years needs one instruction and just get it done. Don't get in their way with all the boxes you have to tick in your digital work instruction tool. So there's a worrying trend here. Sometimes connected worker tools can reinforce it. The good ones don't. The good ones fight against it and bring some of that autonomy back. And I think that's an important point we're going to look at a lot more. So as we look, broadly at what's going on in manufacturing, we identify four big trends that come up a lot. And there's all sorts of different ways to look at these. But in this context, the important point is that each one of them requires much more actually from the human workforce. It requires that workforce to be informed and adaptable and agile, not just a robot with a heartbeat. So this is good news. This is promising and useful. The first of those four big trends, broadly, baking digital capabilities into physical products. The physical things that manufacturers have made for decades or sometimes centuries, we're now seeing digital being baked more deeply into that. We're seeing IoT sensors to allow you to understand what an asset is doing remotely. We're seeing machine learning algorithms to allow you to predict when a part might fail and to step in and take action. Lots of interesting ways in which digital and physical are coming together. One of those, of course, is this notion of the digital twin, which we're hearing a lot about at the moment. A combination of a physical thing and a virtual thing working together to allow you to optimize the use and maintenance of that physical asset. And for the connected worker, the digital twin is a really important tool in allowing them to understand what that asset is doing. I'm standing in front of an engine or a motor and it's making a noise, so it's clearly on. That's good to know. But IoT sensors inside it feeding you information about the speed with which it's rotating, how hot it is, how much it's vibrating, which allows you to build up a much better picture of how it's actually performing and guide you towards the areas where you may need to take action and step in to maintain before something breaks. So digital twin, a really important tool in the connected workers toolbox. Second of our four big trends, all the supply chain stuff, thinking differently about how work gets done around the world. We often, in recent years, often get told globalization is dead. There are tariffs, there are trade barriers, there are global uncertainties that make it difficult to rely upon parts coming from the other side of the planet. And that's all true. But it doesn't mean globalization is dead. It just means globalization is changing. And we have to think differently about how we source material. We have to think perhaps about reshoring, bringing some work back closer to our customers. We think about nearshoring, offshoring, of course, still part of the mix, and these other choices. But the point is, it's not just one. It's about finding the right balance for your products, your supply chains, your material flows to get the work done most effectively. The old jobs from an industrial heartland here in the UK, in parts of the United States, in parts of Germany, wherever it may be, those old jobs that left 40 or 50 years ago are not coming back. What will come back is some of the manufacturing, but probably to be done by robots or by AI or by machine learning or automated processes of various kinds. And in those situations, the few workers who do have a role in those environments need to be more informed, more adaptable, more responsive. They need access to the data to allow them to be making those informed choices. Because if you bring a manufacturing process that employed 1,000 people in a low-cost offshore location, you're not replacing those 1,000 workers, very good as they were, with 1,000 locals. You can't afford them. Even if you could afford them, you probably can't find them. So what you're actually doing is saying, I need 1,000. I had 1,000 open headcount. I'll maybe employ 100. How do I make those 100 perform 10x? How do I give them superpowers through access to all this information and all these insights to allow them to do the job better? And that's a big area of research and interest and investment at the moment. And we see, for example, the whole conversation around moving towards software-defined factories as one way to drive efficiency and drive productivity. We're actually quite a long way from an entirely software-defined factory today. What we're more likely to see are individual connected machines, perhaps software-defined work cells or work centers. The entire factory, still some way off, But again, we're starting to join the pieces together, and the connected worker and the tools they use become that connective tissue between different pieces of automation down on the plant floor. Those workers become bot masters, able to understand and maintain and manage the automation that's running in a facility in interesting ways. The third of our four big trends, all the sustainability stuff, electrification, decarbonisation, and the rest. And in some markets, sustainability is spoken about more quietly than it once was. 2 or 3 years ago, any trade show pretty much anywhere in the world would have been screaming about sustainable solutions and green and environmental credentials and circularity. Most of the trade shows I've been to this year, wherever they are quieter about the sustainability word, but they're still doing the same work. They're just describing it differently. So instead of talking about being green, instead of talking about being sustainable, instead of the sort of the feel good message, they're focused much more on things like reducing waste, reducing raw material use, reducing energy use. So a sustainability message, but one that ties much more tightly to saving money, improving productivity, touching the bottom line directly. So although it's hard to find anyone shouting sustainability anymore, a lot of the underlying capabilities are very much still there. And we see, for example, talk about the circular economy and a real focus on things like reduction, reducing use of raw materials, reducing use of energy, rather than some of the other softer pieces. The fourth of our four big trends, what we call the automation triangle. And I've kind of touched on this a few times already. And this is about finding the right balance between physical automation, that's the robots, software automation, AI, machine learning, and technologies like that. And then the third piece, the human worker. They are still in the mix. They are still important. How do you find the right balance between the three so that each of them plays to their strengths? And there's a whole body of work, being looked at there to understand how we find that right combination for any one use case. And just one quick example of that. This is some data from the International Federation of Robotics. And every year they go out and analyze the number of robots being deployed in various industries in various countries around the world. And as they do that, as you would imagine, the country with the most robots in the world is China. It has more robots than every other country combined, and it's adding more all the time. But a more interesting measure is this one. This is what they call robotic density. And this is the number of robots per 10,000 workers in manufacturing in a country. And the country in this case, which is number one in the world for robotic density, is South Korea. China, number 4. The United States is number 10. So there's quite a long way to go in terms of bringing more robots into the mix in a lot of these markets at the moment. But even South Korea, way out in front, only 1,012 robots per 10,000 workers. So just quickly, before we hear from Matt and how Parsable specifically can help, I just want to sort of briefly look at some ways in which connected worker solutions in general can help with some of the challenges we were looking at here. And just published a piece of work earlier this year, our latest smart manufacturing tech tide, which looks at a number of technologies and gives recommendations to our clients about whether to experiment with that technology, jump in and invest heavily in that technology, maintain your current investment, or start to downplay and start to divest from a technology. And connected worker solutions right up there in the invest category. It is time to start spending on these tools. And the way we describe them is we say they're relatively immature at the moment. There are some exceptions, obviously, but as a category, relatively immature, and but with high business value. And they're doing things like those digital work instructions that I talked about earlier. They're supporting things like field service use cases. They're supporting employee onboarding. So when you do hire someone new, how do you get them up to speed fast? How do you get them following the best procedures as quickly as possible? But now is the time to invest. And we see all sorts of different ways of engaging with these. People sometimes go to the augmented reality capabilities, allowing you to immerse yourself in a digital view of the physical environment. So in this case, the worker is using a tablet to look through the engine of the truck in front of them to actually see what's going on inside it. And we see things like IoT data coming back to tell you when it was last maintained, how fast it's rotating, when the oil was last changed, all those kinds of things. And it's a mistake to think that everything has to look like this. It looks great in a demo. It looks great, to play with and experiment with. It doesn't always have to be this whizzy to deliver real tangible value. Sometimes it might just be a list of instructions, a list of steps to follow, and that is perfectly okay and perfectly valuable too. And actually, in some work we did around augmented reality recently, we talked about the importance of minimum viable reality. Sometimes things like this view here on this screen get in the way. If all you need to know is the oil was last changed 6 months ago, you don't need the pretty picture, you don't need the visualization, you don't need any of that. You just need to know it's time to change the oil. We see other examples. This is one in a plug-in to Microsoft Teams, where different workers able to collaborate around a single design, in this case of a jet engine. Again, really useful, really powerful, really interesting. Sometimes overkill for what you actually want to get done. And it's important, again, to focus on the problem you're trying to solve and select the best tool to solve that rather than assuming you have to have the one with the pretty 3D visualization every time. Because, as I said a moment ago, sometimes that will actually get in your way. So, very briefly, some pointers for starting on this journey. I've already said it's time to invest, but where do you invest? What do you spend your money on? First, identify the task, identify the problem. Don't sit in some innovation team in some nice, air-conditioned office where the coffee's really good and dream up what might be needed on the shop floor. Get your hard hat on, get your steel toe cap boots on, get your high vis vest on, and get down there. Talk to the people doing the job. Feel their pain, feel their blisters, understand where the problem is, and understand that actually a lot of the times the problem that keeps them up at night, the problem that they hate, might be solved by a very simple technical solution. And understand that. So start with something achievable, something measurable, but something that actually helps the people with a problem. And to do that, you're going to have to talk to them first. Get the right workflow. I talked about this a moment ago as well. Don't assume that every worker doing a maintenance task needs the same level of instruction. The new worker who hasn't got a clue what they're doing probably want some videos. They want some helpful hints. They want a very detailed workflow that they can be comfortable following. The really experienced worker can think of nothing they want less than detailed workflows and helpful videos because they get in their way. And you actually potentially create problems because they'll go, oh, I know what I'm doing, tick, 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 without actually reading the words, without actually thinking about it. They will just tick OK again and again and again to move forward. So for them, you actually want a very small number of steps and you want it to be really clear when something is changed that they need to pay attention to. So get the workflow right for the task and the people doing that task. Get the right data, obviously. As we look at digital twins, as we look at all these other ideas, garbage in, garbage out. If the initial data going in is bad, the outcome will also be bad. And people will blame the tool. They won't blame the data. They'll say, this new connected worker tool you made me use is rubbish. That may not be true. The underlying data might have been rubbish. So the data has to be clean, the data has to be well structured, the data has to be well understood. You have to do that first. And any decent connected worker tool will tell you that, the people trying to sell it to you will tell you that loud and clear. And they may also be able to help you with that work as well. And then get the right form factor. And I think this is almost my final point. I've got one more. I already talked about the impressive augmented reality on the tablet. Sometimes we see impressive augmented reality on a headset, a wearable. And sometimes that's exactly what you need for the task. But you need to understand what the task is you're trying to achieve and pick the right form factor to address that. Is it a wearable on someone's head? Is it a wearable on their wrist? Is it a tablet? Is it a smartphone that they carry in their pocket anyway? Is it some HMI fixed next to the machine they're maintaining? Pick the right form factor for the task you're trying to address. And again, don't get caught up in the sexiest, most impressive, most technologically wow tool that you might want to use. Could be a very expensive mistake. I've seen far too many examples of very expensive technology deployed without thought onto the factory floor and very, very quickly broken, entirely accidentally, of course, by workers who didn't want to use it. Oops, I dropped it. Oh dear, sad, or not. And then the final point that I want to make before I hand on to Matt, when the slide moves, AI. I already said, everyone's talking about it, and it has a place here too. And that place is probably not what you can see on the slide in front of you just now. It's probably not saying go to a public website, a large language model, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the others, and say, help me maintain my pump. Because remember what I said earlier about garbage in, garbage out? Trust me, the response will be garbage. It will not help you. However, AI that's trained on your data, your workflows, your operating procedures becomes a very powerful tool in guiding those connected workers to the assets they need. What is the correct temperature for a kettle to boil at? Stupid example. Looking at the product documentation for the kettle, the answer will come back, it's 100 degrees Celsius. And here's the link to where I got it in the product documentation for your industrial kettle. So you can trust, but you can also verify. You can go back to the source and say, oh yeah, no, you're right. But it's guiding you to that information amongst a mass of other data. But done right, AI is a useful tool in the toolbox too. Just don't go too far. And with that, Matt, over to you to hear about how Parsable addresses some of the high-level fuzzy stuff I've been talking about for real, with real software and real customers.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, super insightful. I actually took a full page of notes, and I've seen the presentation before. I think some of the things that I heard that really resonated, the disconnected worker and worker autonomy, and that concerning trend. We couldn't agree more. We see a lot of that, and that's one of the problems that we try to solve with connected worker is this idea that the shop floor is disconnected from the top floor, and they're disconnected from each other. And if you think about the workers of today when they're in their personal lives, we all have our mobile phones here, and we can see the news halfway around the world, but we go into a factory and we get a clipboard and a
Yes.
pencil.
Yes. And your phone is left in your locker a lot of the time. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's madness. And like you think about that, like not only is that demoralizing, but who wants to do that job? You know, who wants to do that? I mean, you can order dinner without leaving your couch,
Yes.
but yet you go into this factory and it's like, oh, here you go. We'll go back 100 years. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Very, very prescient, very helpful. And I think as Paul was going through that, and I think it was very appropriate to describe the market maturity as low because when you look across the connected worker landscape, yeah, Parsable, we've been around for over a decade. But if you look at the adoption of connected worker solutions, it is still very low. And there's an incredible opportunity for folks to move from just departmental group use cases into a much more holistic digital transformation strategy, which really unlocks a lot larger scale opportunity for realizing all these benefits. Like when Paul says things like, how do I make these folks 10x? That's part of how you do it. And you don't do it by giving a couple people a tablet. You do it by connecting everyone together so they have the information that they need to make the decisions in real time. So I think in an emerging market like this, it's really helpful to just hear how people are doing it. Let's just, click down a level and talk about what actual manufacturers are doing. And I love this. I'm a very customer centric guy. I love visiting our customers and manufacturers to, as you were just saying, Paul, just to walk the floor, kind of Gemba walk and just see and feel what's happening. And recently we visited a 100-year-old chocolate factory, which is always a fun trip because you always
Were there freebies?
yeah, you always get the freebies. You always get the freebies. And in any case, so we visited this factory, and it was really just to understand what they were doing, and it was littered in paper. I mean, it was the old way, exactly what we're talking about on this webinar. Most things were done through tribal knowledge, and as some of you may know, a lot of candy manufacturers have very strict regulations around sanitation. And you can, get candies with nuts and you can get them without nuts, and some lines handle both, and they have to be rigorously cleaned between changeovers between changeovers. And it's a highly controlled activity that the EPA audits, and they aren't shy about shutting down plants that are non-conforming. So we went there that day to watch what should have been a 10-hour changeover, right? Sanitation procedure, and it ended up taking 36 hours. 36 hours because they failed the sanitation audit not once, but twice. And they were just, basically the whole line was shut down, and they didn't, because everything was manual, they had no visibility into where the challenge was occurring, right? There was no accountability. You knew something was wrong, but you didn't know where it was. You didn't know when it happened. You didn't know by who it happened. Everything was disconnected. And that was so they ended up losing 26 hours in downtime. And you'd like to think that that's the exception, but it's really kind of the norm in a lot of operations today. And that's what we have the opportunity to affect here. When you look across manufacturing operations in general, the reality is that a lot of us, we're all under pressure. We have delays, downtime, the skills gaps that Paul was mentioning earlier, that tribal knowledge, that old way of paper-based approach is just failing. It's outdated, and despite billions of dollars invested in digital automation, the front line is still dominated by these old school archaic approaches. So that leads us to the question of, well, if it's so obvious, like why haven't we done it before? Like why aren't we pursuing it now? And the reality is, I actually, as Paul highlighted, I think very insightfully in his presentation, that the pain has effectively never been greater. You've got an accelerating workforce that's moving into retirement, and you're losing institutional knowledge in the millions, right? And as Paul said earlier, those jobs just aren't going to come back as they age out decade after decade. And you have increasing supply chain fragility. You've got regulatory pressures. A lot of these macro forces are driving change, and that change is increasingly needs to happen now. So, what does that change look? Went backwards. What does that change look like? The good news is it's not all doom and gloom, right? We have technology today to solve these problems. And if you think about that chocolate manufacturer that I mentioned, there's a happy ending. We've been working with them now for about 6 months. They have full visibility into their sanitation procedures, real-time tracking, clear accountability. They're all connected. The shop floor is connected to the top floor. They're all looking at the same KPIs. And based on that, they're now expanding beyond sanitation into other areas like maintenance, quality, training. It's truly becoming a connected operation. And this goes right back to what Paul was saying about how we evolve from kind of these cells into a much broader ecosystem of digital interconnection with each other. It's the same factory, it's the same team, completely different outcome. It's very, very powerful. So, how do we get started here? The good news, like I said, is the technology is already available to you today. I wanted to take a closer look at what that actually looks like. So, what you can do with a connected worker platform like a Parsable is first digitize your procedures and then deliver them in a highly consumer-friendly way. Right? And that's a very important philosophical point is that you have to win the front line. Again, Paul made a great point about that. When you don't win the front line, those very expensive tools have an uncomfortable habit of breaking, or finding themselves broken. And that's while you can't necessarily break the software with Parsable, the reality is that if it's a disconnected worker experience, if it's a disruptive worker experience, if it's not organic to them, they won't use it. That's just the simple reality. And I think as you can see here, that this workflow, particularly on the mobile device, it's very intuitive. And I've been on the shop floor with many frontline workers where as a test, we will take a digital procedure that was done on a clipboard and with paper, we'll hand them Parsable on a tablet without any training whatsoever, and we'll just say, hey, see if you can complete your task using this. Not surprisingly, they can because it's that intuitive. It's just a digital form of what they've been doing manually with the added benefits of being connected and being more efficient and producing visibility and traceability towards the actions that did or did not occur. So let's dive just one level deeper. As I've hinted at, this is all available to you today. And the good news is you can do it within minutes. You can digitize in minutes. I'm the CEO of Parsable. I've used Parsable myself to digitize procedures in minutes. If you can, use Microsoft Word, if you can use PowerPoint, you can use something like Parsable. It's a no-code builder. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, that just means that you don't actually have to code anything. You can do it visually. That's your first step. Your next step, of course, is to have the frontline workers execute that job. And then the third step is to see the work that's been done, and then to take action off of it. And you just complete that virtuous cycle. You move from one use case to another to another. Oftentimes, we see it moving from one factory to another to another. And the really powerful element of doing that is that you not only create repeatable global standards as you move from each factory to subsequent factories, but you get this multiplier effect because you can see how each of the factories is performing relative to one another in standardized ways. And that is a true multiplier on your business, regardless of whatever metric you're trying to improve, whether it's downtime or OEE or whatever it may be. Uh, that insight across factories with standardized benchmarks is it's incredible to see what folks have done with that in the field. Paul mentioned AI, and AI is something I'm incredibly passionate about as well. It is an opportunity for you to deliver connected worker technologies on the where the workers are today. So rather than having the workers step to the connected worker solution with AI, that solution can meet them where they are. And what I mean by that very practically, very directly, we have capabilities in the platform, for example, where you can take a ChatGPT like interface and you, just as Paul was saying, you can actually query your own data using a ChatGPT like interface. So now think about people who are working on the factory floor. A lot of times they are true veterans of their trade. As Paul said, they've done it for decades. They don't even need to necessarily look at work instructions. But I will bet you that most of those folks are not experts in analytics. They are probably not power users of Tableau or Power BI or any of the platforms like that, right? So if you present them with a dashboard and you say, hey, here's your dashboard. I just spent a month building it for you in my perfect little eco chamber, and then you walk that onto the plant floor and expect change, you're probably not going to get it, because it's just not an area of expertise that they bring to the table. However, everyone knows how to have a conversation and ask a question in their own language. For example, what jobs were not completed last shift? That's what you're doing every day. Now, with AI, you can ask that question of your data. And that is something that's never existed before. I'll say, incidentally, we released this capability last year. It is the fastest adopted feature set in Parsable's history. It's that powerful. We had over 80% of our customers adopt it in the first 90 days. It is truly game changing. So if you're not dabbling yet, if you haven't dipped your toe into the AI pool, this is a very practical way to think about how you can start that journey. Speaking of starting the journey, I've shared a lot about the challenges that customers have had in the past before they used a connected worker solution, the success they've had from using that solution. So how do you get started? And Paul said it perfectly. I actually loved how Paul said it. Start where it hurts, and usually start where it hurts the most. That's what we guide our customers to. Look, a connected worker solution generally can support hundreds of different use cases, hundreds, quality, production, maintenance, safety, you name it. If there's a manual process, if there's a paper-based process, a paper-based SOP, chances are you can digitize that and do it much more efficiently than you do today. That's not really the problem. The problem is identifying those highest values, most urgent use cases, and then starting there and building adoption around that. And I'll just say as an aside, I was on site with a customer not long ago, and they were telling me about how they had this one group, and this gentleman had been doing his job for 35 years, and he said, "Look, I've been doing this for 35 years. I don't need this. I don't need this." And they solved that problem, and they got him to use it. And I said, "Okay, you got to walk me through. What did you do? Like, what silver bullet did you fire to do that?" He said, "We didn't try to force them to digitize a process that we wanted to digitize. I just asked him what hurt the most. I just asked him what he hated doing every day." And he said, "Oh yeah, well, let me just tell you about that. Like I got to check, as Paul's saying, I got to go check the oil on this machine. And then I got to sit there for 25 minutes and wait for my supervisor to come all the way from the other side of the plant and come and sign off and say that, yep, he checked this." So we just digitize that. Now he can take a picture. The supervisor can sign it remotely in 30 seconds. He loves the technology. That's how you win the resistance, right? That's how you fight that resistance and help with to change management. Let's take a quick, just to wrap up here, let's just take a closer look at a couple other examples because I like to zoom out into the big picture and think about this on a truly global scale. And while we're in the very first innings of connected worker technology and connected worker adoption, we've seen some dramatic levels of scale. We work with a global brewer today that has over 20,000 frontline workers on the Parsable platform. They've achieved north of 30 million in productivity gains, and those are hard measured numbers. Um, Gas and energy, totally different field, very, very technically complex. Here again, digitized over 90,000 labor hours, 6 million in cost savings. And the powerful story here is this is just one use case. That's just one use case, not the dozens that they actually use us for. Building materials. I love this one because uh, it was they support over 300 sites with the exact same metrics and the exact same SOPs that are required for environmental compliance. And so, very consistent with the example that I gave a few minutes ago, this is a living, breathing, real life deployment where they are comparing the metrics across 300 different sites and then learning where the sites are in and out of compliance. And just doing that, they saved over $2 million in fines, in regulatory fines. But even more importantly than that, they built a foundation for how they can continue to advance their efficiency as an organization by having everybody with a universal view of productivity, which again goes back to the theme that Paul was hitting on. And that was up and running in 6 months. So you might say, well, geez, Matt, 300 sites. Yeah, great. Like who's got 10 years to do that? They did that in 6 months. 6 months. Because it was all, like I said, you can digitize these things in minutes. And once you establish the standard and the process, rinsing and repeating is really not that challenging.
And did they do that themselves or did you do it for them?
Yeah, great question, Paul. So, with a lot of folks, we have a very teach them to fish mentality. So we'll start together as your partner, and we'll say, look, this is what you're trying to do. This is the best practice to do that, and we'll walk you through how to do that. So you have hand holding that entire way. You have the blueprint the entire way, and you can trust in that journey. And then as you move from each step of that maturity curve, we're there to continue to help you. But we still really try to emphasize that, fish on your own mentality so that you can ultimately scale, build out your own center of excellence. And while we'd love to be there for you every step of the way as a service provider, ultimately we want you to graduate into that world where you're driving the boat for yourself. It's a great question. Well, actually, on that topic, Paul, well, we have just a few minutes left. I'm curious. I ran through a couple of these successful outcomes. You have an incredibly wide aperture on this market. What have you seen as most successful with connected worker solutions at this stage?
I think a lot of it is around, the types of examples you've been giving here and some of the case studies you leaned into in the previous slides as well. Finding that pain point. And it's often some bizarre regulatory process where you have to, get a form signed in triplicate, and smoothing some of the friction there so that the regulations are still complied with and the reason behind the regulations is still respected, but you're just smoothing out some of the mess there. And I think the big challenge, and you kind of alluded to it a few times, the real problem when we start digitizing shop floor operations is when we do it for head office or for the control room. And so that, frontline worker is having to fill in more forms and comply with more steps, and they get nothing out of it. It's all to give some distant person they've never seen another, line on the dashboard. The early adoption only works if you're actually helping the person who is doing it. If there's, ancillary benefit to the organization as well, then great, but it has to help the person you're asking to do more here. Because that then gets them on board and gets them to start seeing the value. And then you start to bring in more of the reporting back to head office stuff further down the line. But if you start there, they're going to hate it and they're going to push back against it and they're going to find all the reasons they can not to do it or to give you, poor quality data because they don't care.
Yeah. 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 Incredibly well said. I think, when I look at early technologies like this that have such high value, I think that's really the number one challenge is just that cultural change, that change management. And
Yeah.
I think you said it incredibly well. You start with the pain. We see the exact same thing. And it's so simple and so obvious that sometimes it is easy to forget because you do see some of these more holistic corporate initiatives where it's like we're going to be digital,
Yeah.
you know?
And I've got a model and it looks great in PowerPoint.
Yeah,
What do you mean it won't work?
yeah. No, these are real people. They're real
Yeah.
people. They're producing real goods and they're masters of their trade. And again, what I love about this isn't about replacing workers. This is about 10xing workers, like you said
Yeah.
earlier. Um, well, look, I know we're almost at time here, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. This is just a taste of what connected worker platforms can do. And when you empower people with the right tools and the right data, we don't just improve productivity. We really future-proof our operations. And I think that's really the takeaway that I'd like to end on here. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please just reach out to us at info@caisoft.com. You can also learn more on the Parsable website. We will send out this webinar to your email so you can review it on your own time, share it with colleagues, and absolutely appreciate your time, Paul. Pleasure chatting with you as always. Be sure to check out Forrester's research. I've been a fan of Forrester for 20 plus years now and do great work. So thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.